All right, everybody, it looks like we're live. Welcome to another episode of Corona Hour with Paradise and Lisette. And this is our episode number 5, gaming, social distance gaming. Very excited. It's a really cool topic that I think we have for you guys today. And I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name is Lisette Cortes. I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of Florida, and I specialize in OCD and anxiety conditions.
And I'm Paradise Afshar. I am in New York, and I am a journalist up here covering the coronavirus.
And today's guest speaker is Dr. Steve Arcidiacono. He is a Florida licensed psychologist. He's currently treating children and families at the Boys Town, South Florida Behavioral Health Clinic in West Palm Beach. And he specializes in behavioral problems, ADHD, screen time management, sleep health, anxiety, and tics and Tourette's, which I think is all really good stuff for us to cover and talk about today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
The one industry that is not dying right now is video games because everyone is playing.
Yeah, it's actually booming. Yeah,
so
that's true.
Tell us like a little bit about gaming and how it kind of plays into the virus and everything.
Yeah, so I was actually going to twist it around on you guys. Surprise, surprise. So I was going to ask you guys what you think, like when you think of somebody who says, okay, they're a gamer, like what would you think about? What would that person look like? What would they act like?
I think of men generally, and I know I shouldn't because there's a lot of female gamers out there, so I know that's wrong. But I do think of men generally. And I think of them as, honestly, the image that comes to my mind is someone like in their 30s or 40s. Like I don't really think of the teenager at first. My first image is someone who's like in their 30s who grew up playing video games and now has the money to like be the inner nerd that they wanted to be.
Sure.
So that's the image I have in my head of like
You're
the
describing
guy who is
me,
an adult
right?
during the day and then like comes home and plays a video game.
That's this guy right here.
I think of you.
Okay.
Definitely.
What about you, Lisa?
I will second that, and then almost like extensive hours. Like, I don't know, I feel like when I think of gaming, I think of like extensive time and kind of like consumed. Okay, this is probably horrible, but like almost like South Park episode, like
like the person like laying back and eating the chips and
with Doritos.
Or cheesy or something.
I also think of a really good, like personality wise though, like besides image, I think of someone with like a really cool imagination. So I think you almost have to have one to be a good gamer. I don't think you can be a very black and white. I think you kind of need to like see some color in your world image. So that's like personality wise, I see that. And I see someone who is like looking for social interaction. Because I think depending on the game that you play, but the type of games I'm having in my mind, it's someone who kind of wants like a group of friends away from their friends.
Wow.
So maybe like talk with their friends online, but also like someone who wants to have like a whole nother world of friends that's a little bit different.
Well, I think I have to give you credit for having the most like positive answer to that sense of video games, and they show their like video game collection in their little gamer area. But one of the things I point out is that it's literally everyone that's playing these games. It's 98% of kids are playing video games, and that's not hyperbole. That's the real fact. It's 98%, and I don't know who those 2% are. I don't think I've ever met them. Maybe they don't have internet too. I don't know where they live.
They're lying on the answers so they don't get like in trouble. Is exactly who they are.
I don't know. But
and so, just to kind of like get everybody back on track for anybody that is just joining us right now, we did have like a little bit of a hiccup and we got kicked out when we first started the broadcast. But we're talking about social distance gaming. And we're talking about like all the ins and outs of like what is it like to be a gamer, and like this like almost like stereotypes in a way, right? That maybe tend to be a little negative, but we also see in like the creativity and the ability for people to connect, and the people to like kind of like bring people who are distanced in a way together.
I completely agree, and I think that's probably, if nothing else from this talk, that's one of the main things I want to get across is that probably if you don't have a lot of exposure to a group, you wind up with stereotypes. We know that about most subgroups. And so just to kind of pull the veil off of that, Paradise, you were exactly right. Actually, the average age of a gamer is mid-30s.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah, you nailed it.
Wow.
So that's the average age. And then
So
you were
stereotype is correct.
and you were also correct that the majority are male, are identify as male, but it's just under 50-50 female. So it's like 45% or so.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah,
Wow.
it's much higher than most people tend to think. Now, what you define as a gamer, you know, does playing a Scrabble game on your phone count? Does playing, you know, these popular games that are coming out now? We had talked about Animal Crossing is a big one right now. And I think that's one that a lot of people are engaging in across age groups, across personalities. That one's got a mass appeal.
I think they all count, by the way.
Yeah, I think so too.
I don't care if you're playing on a console. I don't care if you're playing on your phone. A game's a game.
They're starting to merge together, so it gets indistinguishable of like playing on a PlayStation versus a computer versus your phone. Those lines are a lot blurrier. So I think that's also part of the mass appeal, is they're so much more accessible. I mean, you don't have to be hooked up to anything. You could just turn on your phone and you could play some pretty, you know, intense games, even just remotely. So, you touched on the social part too. I think that's probably out of the benefits. That's probably number one. And I think if we're talking about a situation like we're in now, where we're all socially isolated, that's become one of the best ways to engage with people. But it's another way of hanging out without having to just face-to-face talk. You know, when I worked at a site where I was able to do this, sometimes when I would try to connect with adolescents, we would go for walks, or we would play basketball, or like do something else to kind of make it so that you weren't so intensely staring at the other person, expecting them to say something. And a lot of times the conversations went much easier in the midst of doing something else. And I think that these games really allow that for people, especially if you're not as confident with the face-to-face interaction, even outside of the coronavirus. I think it's helpful to be able to communicate about something that you're doing together, as opposed to just staring at each other and saying, well, what do you like to do for?
So hopefully third time's the charm and we can stay connected. So here we are, technology. But thanks guys for hanging in there. Those of you that have been watching, sorry about the spottiness. So just kind of like recapping a little bit, we've talked about the different types of people who maybe play games outside of like the typical stereotype. And we've talked about the different kinds of bringing people together through gaming. And I think, you know, you made a very good point. Even in treatment, when we are working with like younger kids, adolescents, doing activities together is a way of bringing like, you know, closeness without it having to be about just like, tell me about this, tell me about that. It's like an activity that people can do together can have so much value.
And I think that's one of the biggest recommendations when I'm working with families and they come in and they have problems with the game. A lot of times I'm trying to assess how much familiarity the parents have with what the kid is doing. And a lot of times I'm finding they don't really understand it very well at all. And so they're sort of interrupting them in the middle of things that are important to the kid, and they don't understand it. They're seeing it as like a game they should just be able to pause. But one of the things you'll learn quickly if you try to familiarize yourself, you can't pause most games nowadays. So, you know, for example, you know, when the Fortnite craze was at its height, I had a lot of people saying, well, that, you know, they're flipping out because I'll just come in and turn off the TV. And usually once I have them familiarize themselves with the game, they'll understand, well, they just spent the last 20 minutes surviving and gathering and helping their friends. And they have 3 friends on their headset that they're trying to help at the same time. And, you know, they just committed to that. And you just walked over and just turned it off immediately. And, you know, if you have familiarity with that, you might be able to communicate in a different way. And maybe you could come in and say, hey, you know, I can tell you're just about to be done, so I'm going to wait. Or maybe even I'm going to cheer you on. And then when you're done, we'll transition. And the kid will most likely be able to transition once that round is over. You know, if you familiarize yourself enough, you'll be able to speak the language a little bit and have more empathy for what they're dealing with. You know, one of the tips I've given that's pretty straightforward is get familiar. And if there are rounds, maybe you can give them their playtime in rounds instead of an amount of time. You know, if you have a timer or something.
So it's like the real world like equivalent of if I'm playing basketball and I'm like, get out of there in the middle of a game. Because at the end of the day, everyone's working towards the same goal. And now I just let all my friends down. I just left the game early. Right.
Yep. It's just like that. But imagine it was like there's like a school game too, because like there's a pressure on there too. A lot of the kids, they're doing things like they're streaming their games, they're posting them online. There's a social element. you could do what's called spectating, meaning like I might not even have that game, but I'm just watching you play it. And so there's like a little audience there too. It's like I said, if you're not familiar with it, it gets very difficult to explain it if you're not engaged in it. So that's one of the biggest tips I give is engage in it. And you might find out some good things about it. You might find out some not so good things about it, but that might help guide your decision making as a parent of what's okay, what's not okay, how much is okay, how much isn't okay. How do I communicate when is an okay time or when you need to stop? You know, and I think one of the questions that we initially posited is like, how do you know when it's too much? And my answer to that is when it gets in the way of other priorities. And so that when you boil it down, that winds up being the big problem, right? So when the parents come to me concerned about the games, they're saying things like, well, you know, I feel like they don't have any friends, or they're not spending any time with their family, or their grades have dropped, or they're not sleeping. They're staying up all night playing the games. And so for me, that's where it becomes a problem. Now, what do you call that? What do we diagnose that with? It doesn't matter. There's a problem, and they're prioritizing the games over other things that need to be prioritized.
So when you
that
say
could
they
be
don't
anything.
have friends, do video game friends count as friends?
I think they do.
Okay.
I agree.
People will argue with me, but I have a web.
We are back on. Can we just talk about like how this would be like a huge problem if you were gaming, and how like lag oftentimes creates a lot of distress in people?
Sure. Yeah. If you want to make a kid rage, that's the word for that. Yeah. That's a really surefire way to do that. Spotty internet connection, surprise disconnects, lag. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So when it comes to the coronavirus, like people are playing more games now, I feel like, because now people are home and it's great. I don't think you can even find game consoles easily online anymore.
So I'll tell you right now. So we actually were looking for a Nintendo Switch and we could not get one. They're sold out in all the stores. We even looked at like the secondhand, you know, offer up kind of stuff, and people were buying them and reselling them for, you know, double the price. So we had a hard time. We had a hard time, and then there's scammers and all sorts of things. So we had a hard time getting one. We eventually did, so that's coming. So I'll experience the Switch. That's been the one I think I've seen the most hoopla about. There was Animal Crossing is a huge release, and a lot of people are playing that together. Like I said, it kind of crosses age spans. It has appeal for younger kids and older people and all genders. So I think that one has been a really big one for people. And you could play that one online too. So, you know, they can connect with other people. And I think up to maybe like 8, if I remember correctly. So they can have groups together.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, I mean, I've noticed that one thing about this is, at least when it comes to Corona, I think a lot of people are using them for comfort. I've noticed a lot of people are playing the games that they played when they were kids a lot more. Like I've noticed a lot of Mario Kart, like Dr. Mario, like those kinds of games. I think it has that good familiar feeling to it. And people exploring new games. I mean, is there an escapism that is healthy with video games? Because I feel like that's what some people are doing. I don't want to say everyone, but what some people are doing with them.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. There are people who use games sometimes, I think, for like their go-to feel-good thing. There are some people who use it for releasing their frustrations. There's some people that use it for connecting with others socially. I think there are a number of different reasons why people play. I think the escapism is a good point. I think sometimes what happens is people, sorry, I'm covered in light here. I think sometimes people are kind of using it too much. Like you escape from your concerns and it's okay for a very short period of time. But when you do it for extended periods of time, it starts to cut into other priorities. You know, like you can have a momentary escape, but then you don't want it to become your new go-to. It's not always reliable as something you're able to do to cope with a situation. So, you know, I'm thinking of an example for me, like texting is one that like whenever I have a little part of social anxiety, that's like my go-to. I do it without even thinking, right? Like I just pull up my phone and I'm not really texting anybody. So I think that's where it's like a concern. It's like, well, if you need to have some other things that you can do. You need to be able to cut away and go outside. You need to make sure that you're exercising. You need to make sure that you're sleeping, taking care of the basics, having some balance of your life. And that's why I keep bringing up the priorities, you know, making sure that you're taking care of your schoolwork if you're in school, your work if you're at work. And I think that's when you start to blur those lines, that's when the escapism becomes a problem. If I'm escaping from my work while I'm at work, that's problematic.
I think
That
in
makes
a way,
sense.
like in past talks that we've done, one of the main things that has come up is like how much are things like impairing your functioning, right? Like
Hmm.
even from like worry can be helpful to a certain degree until it starts to like impair your functioning. And I think in a way, like video games can be positive in that sense. Like, so this should be better this time. Sorry again about the very ironic like
Yeah.
internet difficulties when we're especially talking about this particular
Screen time,
topic.
technology. Yeah.
Right, but here we are. So I'll let you guys just kind of like jump in. I know Paradise, you were making a very good point of, you know, how
About what? I forgot.
You know what? I think I have a thought that you sparked with that other question you had. You were talking about like the
go for it.
escapism and those things, and I was thinking about it. Another thing that's important to realize, Lisette in the beginning talked about gaming for extended periods of time. I think there is something to be said about like binging on these things and how the brain works and how that can affect your ability to enjoy things. So if you think about it, these games were created from the start with the intention of getting you to keep playing them. If you think about what the arcades were like, it was like, okay, how do I get people to put more quarters in? And these things are programmed to make you have fun and also be challenged and also get immediate feedback and all of these things that really engage your brain and really are saturated with excitement and enjoyment and frustration, but then you overcome it and you feel good about that, and you're also connecting with other people and you overcame it together. And so there's so much of that your dopamine release is super high while you're doing it. And then if you do that for extended periods of time and then try to do something else that isn't as exciting, it's going to kind of pale in comparison. You could think of it if you ate like a bunch of Sour Patch Kids and then tried to eat your vegetables. Like they're going to taste
I've done
worse.
that. It's not fun. It does not taste as good.
Yeah.
I've literally done that.
So I think again, the idea that I'm encouraging people as far as like how to manage this is just balance. It's like, okay, you can play for a period of time and then take a break, go do something else it can be still enjoyable if you want, but not as intense on that, right? So maybe go draw or read or go for a walk or talk with a family member or something else, just to kind of take a break. I think by age, it sort of depends how long that would be. The younger kids, it should be shorter. The older kids can go a little bit longer. I would say no more than maybe 2 hours. If you get up to 2 hours, that's a lot. There was a study that was released, I think last year, that had this big scary headline like screen time changes kids' brains. And they had measurable differences with kids who had extended screen time. And I looked into it a little further, and it wound up being something around like 7 hours a day of screen time.
But that's a lot of screen time, though.
That is a lot.
Does
So
that
this is what I'm
just mean
saying.
video games, or does that count as phone, TV, everything, right?
So that was everything.
Like all screens.
So screen time. Yep. But you start to add it up, and if you track it on your phone or on your PCs or whatever, you can usually get the stats of your playtime or your screen time, and it does start to add up pretty quickly. You might be surprised at how much you have of that. So I think that there's sort of like the most important thing is the priority system, making sure you're taking care of priorities, and then after that, some semblance of limits as far as how much time is played during one set, like one sitting, and then how much time is played each day. But if you can balance those out, I think that the scariness of the gaming becomes not so scary, especially if you get familiar with it more.
Well, not everyone's home, so I feel like gaming is like a default almost. Like, I'm bored. What else am I going to do with my life?
Yeah,
like, especially if you are that typical gamer who is in his 30s, right? You're in your 30s, you just got laid off.
Sure.
You really have nothing to do during the day. I mean, you could job hunt a little bit, but Florida site's down. So what are you going to do? You're going to play a video game a little longer.
Yeah, it's like enabled right now. It's like okay to do it. You're a hero if you're staying inside. Yeah. I've noticed. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, they release these like screen time recommendations every few years, and they actually posted an update that basically said, while this is all going on, it's okay if you're not totally following the screen time recommendations. Just prioritize mental health, and that includes like the parents' mental health, because a lot of times they're trying to work from home or they're dealing with their own anxiety because of the virus and different things going on. So, they even the American Academy of Pediatrics was like, it's okay for now. Like, don't worry as much. So
rules don't mean anything anymore, and there's no rules. What if I said since the beginning of it? There are no more rules.
I think that's the take-home message I'm taking. No, just kidding.
it's still a priority system. I mean, I would put health on top of that, and that would include physical and mental health. Definitely. So that's sort of what it boils down to. It's like, okay, you have to make sure you're still moving around, and you also need to make sure that, you know, if you're dealing with your 7-year-old bothering you and trying to handle them while you're trying to do work and all these things, it's okay if they spend some extra time on the games, as long as you're familiar with it, you're okay with the content, it's not excessive, it's not eating into other priorities, it's okay. Right. So yeah, that's my take on it for now.
A very big piece of it, again, is like that concept of like avoidance. And we talked about in past talks about like avoiding the stress and how that actually just increments the stress. And I think that we have to think of what is the intention behind this like time you're going to spend, gaming. Are you 100%. Trying to like escape and avoid, and or is it entertainment, being social, being able to communicate and connect with your friends, which in many ways is like incredibly positive.
Right. I agree with you 100%. And I think the easiest way to set up the system, like if you're a parent or even by yourself, I have this for myself. So I don't know if you could tell, but my little home office is my baby's room. And I have a rule for myself with gaming, which is that I won't play if she's awake. So my priority is family above the gaming. So even if I'm done with work, the family's still staying there as a priority.
She must be little.
Yeah, she's coming up on 2.
Yeah, that's why. Wait till she's like 15, it'll switch.
it might, but for now, that's the way that I'm setting it up, right? So I don't want to leave her unattended. I don't want to feel like I'm, the opportunities that I have with her, that I'm staring at a phone or a game or something like that with the headphones on, really disengaged. So, and I think that if you set it up the way that would be ideal to demonstrate the priorities, it would be like, okay, do this difficult thing, then you can take a break and reward with something, then chunk it into another difficult thing, and then break. And then once they're done with their work for the day, there's no real it doesn't have to be a time limit, as long as the other priorities, if it's time for dinner and family's a priority, you got to come and eat with the family if that's important for your family. But I think that it's got to be clear. So like, tell them what the priorities are. We kind of expect kids just to know, but sometimes they don't know.
Is this a conversation you should have with your child? Like, hey, you know what? Like, if they're actually, depending on what age, I think any age, so you can have the priority conversation with your child.
I think you can do it yourself as an adult too.
Oh, like, especially as an adult too. I mean, just like, go up to them and even to yourself and say, what do I value in my life?
Mm-hmm. I recommend that they make like a list, like make a top 5 or make a top 10. Safe or the health, safety, family, work, friends, recreation.
The friends and recreation are kind of going together. So if you're playing with your friends, they're both bottom of the list. But like you said, if it's dinner time, if it's anything else, that's into
But it even shows that like if you were playing a game that was by yourself and your friends are asking you to play with them, you should take that priority, because it's slightly better than just playing by yourself.
That's a good point.
And there's research on this. There's when people were researching like violence in video games, which is its own whole topic. One of the things they found is there were some mitigating factors. So in other words, if you go in, there are games that you could just drop in and just murder everybody. And it's like free for all is what it's called. Wow. So you just go in and it's every man for himself, and you're all trying to take each other out. And that tends to not have as good outcomes as if you're playing cooperative games. They call them co-op.
So if I kill people with people, it's better than if I kill people by myself.
Yeah, actually, yes. It not eliminates, it mitigates that violent factor. So you're doing other things. You're collaborating, you're communicating, you're working as a team, and that mitigates the just like I need to kill everyone kind of impulse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what I was going to ask about, like, right now, I feel like we're all experiencing a little bit of like social loneliness to some regard. And personally, like I just downloaded The Sims and I've been playing it again and it's awesome. But it's not necessarily like my go-to. Like, I know I find my go-to is like chat with my girlfriends over Zoom, but I wonder if for some people like that brings this kind of like social connectedness, like in a way like that kind of like I'm going to go and get my social like fix from like my friends, being that I am like only with like this one or two people in my home, you know, and sometimes we need kind of like our own individual time, especially like in relationships.
I agree. Yeah, I agree completely. So you can have different relationship dynamics in any little subgroup that you're in. So what gets kind of interesting with the games is a lot of them you'll have different roles. So it's not always, it depends on which one you're playing, but it's not always equal. So for example, one of the games that I play is called Overwatch, and in that one there's different types of characters that all have different unique abilities. And there is a role in a lot of online games called support. And so that player actually isn't going in there killing everybody. They're trying to help their team. So like one of the characters that I play the most, he skates around and he's super fast, and when he's near you he heals you. So even if you're getting impacted by the enemy team, if I skate over to you, I'll help keep you alive. So you get to play a different role than you would in every other situation. I could be hyper aggressive with one relationship, and then I go online and I could be the support character that's trying to help out my friends, and they see me as somebody who's a helpful person. It's just unique. It's its own little avenue that you can be whoever you want. I think that's another important thing to point out too. You don't have to be you. When you make The Sims, you might make yourself, or you might make another version of you and kind of live out that fantasy of like, what would it be like if I was purple? And what if, you could change your gender, you can change how feminine you look, you can date multiple people at once, you can do all sorts of stuff with The Sims. So, it doesn't have to be you. You can kind of be a version of you online. I think that's pretty cool.
Speaking of like versions of, I mean, it does kind of mimic life sometimes, like in World of Warcraft when there was you're saying how there was like a pandemic one time in the game, and then it kind of, mimics life now. Are those moments when you're just like, this is just like when that video game happened? Like,
yeah,
as big as a pandemic, but even like the conversation you had in a video game that was, hey, I really went through this. I feel like everybody like did a, I don't know, dress rehearsal for life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that there's some feedback you can get. So we had, with my little crew of people that play online, we've had conversations with, who takes the lead, who's the person communicating, how are they doing that, what's a more helpful way of doing that. And so you can even get like social feedback. And so, I know some of them personally and some of them only through the game. So I can know, okay, cool. Personally, they tend to do this too. But if I give them this feedback in the game, I'm making this example up, but let's say that it was like, some people are more aggressive with their language online. I don't know anybody like that, but
not at all.
But if you're talking to a teammate and you're using aggressive language, and somebody else on the team says, hey, like, try to keep it civil or something like that. That's feedback to that person that might also apply in real life. That they might need to go, oh, I gotta watch myself and be careful about how I'm communicating to people that I'm working with.
Would I take the criticism differently if I'm playing it like with my friends and someone's like, dude, watch the language, rather than like my boss telling me that or my mom telling me that or someone else? I mean, do kids or even adults, I keep saying kids, but do you receive it differently depending on source?
Yeah, I think that mimics real life too. I think you would always receive that differently depending on source, right? So yeah. My guess would be that if you're playing collaboratively, in other words, you're trying to accomplish an end result, then your motivation is to try to do whatever's best to make that happen. So if by communicating in a more supportive manner, you're more likely to make that happen, then you would most likely adapt to make that happen. And I've seen that. It's pretty cool. One of the games that I played called Destiny, there's so many little intricate details. And there was one time I remember we had to like climb a mountain that you're not meant to climb. And, the player, they literally called them a Sherpa. They bring you in and they guide you on like how to accomplish this task in the game. Yeah. And it's not always climbing a mountain. It's a Sherpa is somebody who their intent is to just show you what to do, and they come in and they guide you into how to accomplish that task. So yeah, I would say that it depends on like your motivation, right? Like, is my motivation to be successful in this? And if so, and if it's my friend especially, I'm much more likely to kind of take that and give it a try.
So I think in many ways this speaks to like developmentally. Right now, kids are at home. They're not necessarily socializing day to day. They're not really building up those social skills and kind of like what you were saying, Paradise, like how do I respond in these difficult social situations? Those are all the skills that I think kids learn while they're in school. And that's why it's so valuable for them to do things like together.
This is a double-edged sword though, because I think I can't remember if we were on the call yet, but we were talking about when people were playing with friends versus playing with strangers. And so I think a lot of parents don't always understand that the games that the kids are playing, if they have their headset on, you might not hear what they're talking about on there. And with a lot of them, almost every game is online nowadays. And with a lot of them, you can connect with other people, whether you know them or not. And you might be playing with them, you might be playing against them. There's no social filter there necessarily, unless you go in and you work on the settings. So,
Right.
If these kids are kind of learning from people that they're playing with, you want to make sure that the people that they're playing with are guiding them and giving them the feedback you want them to be giving them. Does that make sense? So they could be
Absolutely.
also
Parental
having
settings on
modeling.
these things? Like
Almost every single one will have some
Okay.
sort of parental setting. But, I would say that the best parental setting is the parent. They should be listening to what they're doing or playing the game with them a few times to see what it's all about. I can't tell you how many times I've had parents like surprised at what was happening. I remember one time I was talking with somebody and they were like, "Oh yeah, they play this racing game," and I was like, "Oh yeah, what's the racing game?" And they said, "Oh, I don't know, it's some like Grand Theft Auto or something." And I was like,
Racing
"That's
game.
not a racing game. No, you need to know what that is,
Well,
So,
I mean, aren't you
Oh,
buying the
gosh.
game for your kids though? Like, I mean, there's a parent.
So a lot of games nowadays they have what's called freemium. You get the game for free. Fortnite, for example, is one of these. So you can play Fortnite for free,
Okay.
and then you go in, and then there are purchases within the game. That's again, it's a whole nother conversation.
Ooh.
In-app purchases, and they could total up to way more than the actual game. Fortnite, for example, most modern games when they come out, if it's a one-time purchase, they're about $60. But the average person who played Fortnite wound up paying like 80 or 90 overall, and the
Wow.
game's
Because you're
free.
paying for like the extra equipment, the costumes, whatever you want. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So the people designing these games are intending for you to get hooked on the game and then want things. A lot of times they're cosmetics. So they're things of like how you look. So they call them skins in Fortnite, where it's like how your character looks. And they make them really cool. And of course, the cooler they are, the more they cost. And they turn them into this like Chuck E. Cheese token kind of economy. So you can't totally tell how much real money it is. And there's conversations about whether or not it's teaching gambling to kids, because a lot of times they're presented in what's called loot boxes. It's like their little surprises, and you pay with real money to open up the box. And then you don't know what the quality is of the item inside or what items inside there'll be.
Oh, that's really gambling.
Yeah.
I mean, like, because you don't know, right? You're paying money,
It's a
you don't
slot
know
machine.
the outcome. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's
Sounds
controversy,
like it.
legally speaking, as far as whether or not that's okay for games that are available to kids.
And I think this is so important for parents to know, because I think right now we're all under so much like stress and like anxiety and kind of like, okay, you go and do your thing so I can just like go do my thing. And yet we need this conversation to really be occurring for all of these reasons. For parents to really like touch base with their kids.
You talked about escapism. I mean, for a lot of parents, the escapism is letting the kid play the game, because, they might be a bother to them if they're not playing the game. You sit them in front of the game, they'll occupy themselves for hours on end. But if you interact with them, well, that takes energy and effort, and I'm already stressed, and I'm trying to work from home, and I've got a parent a grandparent I'm worrying about, and all these other things. And it's like, well, you can't just escape from the kid. You can't use it as a babysitter. Maybe just in small doses if you really need a break, but it's the same kind of idea. It's like, are you using that to escape? Are you using that for your avoidance? And that's usually a good litmus test of whether or not it's okay.
So it can go both ways, with the kids and also the parents.
Sure.
Like, who is avoiding what, and how is this impacting like your quality of life? So many things we need to kind of like watch out for. And I think we've also talked about like many of also the like benefits, of having these avenues for being social with their friends, basically.
I mean, it does help too with some things like I know ADHD. There can be some benefits to playing video games on that. I know there's some like that have come out recently. They're especially designed for kids with ADHD.
Sure. And if you, a lot of the families that I'm working with, the kids are telling me that a lot of the online programs incorporate some element of game in them. I don't know if the games are created with the intention of being fun. So I don't know if they're designing them the best way. But I've always talked about how if you merge some of those things together, if you made, each round you had to do a pull-up or something, we would have ripped gamers.
Totally.
They're super motivated to earn the in-game items and to win and all these things. And if you can integrate education and games, I think it could be a beautiful relationship. I think that sometimes what happens is that how do I say this? The intent is to try to make it like backdoor the fun in. And so it becomes a punishment at sometimes if you force it like that. I think what would be better is if it was like a game and then maybe one element of the game included a little bit of education in it, which I've seen on occasion, but I would say that's rare. The kids with ADHD, one of the reasons why I think they're so attuned to the gaming is the thing I mentioned before about that like dopamine release and the salience of the game, the excitement of the game. When we wind up trying to work with kids who have ADHD and we give parents recommendations, we wind up basically gamifying the kid's life a lot of time. It's like give them immediate gamifying, like trying to create their life into something that's closer to a game. If you think about what a token economy is, right? So somebody does something well and you give them a coin and at some point they can turn that in for a prize or something like that. You're kind of gamifying their life. But the principles in there, the behavioral principles are give them immediate feedback, make it exciting, right? Like the salience, the excitement of what you're doing. Absolutely. We talk about make it visual, right? Like make a poster, give them a very easily identified indicator of progress, like make the progress bar increase. I mean, all these games have those things already incorporated into them. So we're kind of giving recommendations to parents to try to match that, which if you are a parent who has a kid who has ADHD, engage in some of the games, see what the things are that are motivating to them, and you can create your own versions of those usually in real life.
That's kind of cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I like how you're kind of like conceptualizing some of this. I don't necessarily work with like little ones, but I do work with like adolescents and some kids are in like 10 or so. But there's definitely a huge piece of like a behavioral component in helping them like, just overall like mental health. And I like how you're making sense of like this connection between like games and like the strategies and interventions that we would normally do in treatment anyways. There is kind of like that positive, like there's reinforcement for doing tasks that you need to achieve and kind of like going on these like quests, which in like real life could be like, finishing up a certain, chore that you got to do or something like that. Yep. So I definitely see how the connection between the two can be so positive, and for parents to perhaps consider what it's like to, make something, like you said, gamify it, around the home when right now there is like the stress and just kind of like tiredness and kind of like avoidance and all those things.
Well, I think it's kind of cool because when it comes to any kind of mental health, the idea of customizing it, because I don't think any two people have the exact same issue, the exact same way. And I love the idea of like, if my kid or if me as an adult has one thing that would help me, let's customize it for that, because it's not a cookie cutter industry.
Absolutely. And again, there's different reasons why these games are so engaging to people. Some people might like the competitiveness. Okay, can we make this competitive, even if it's against themselves? Today you did, this amount of work. Let's see if you could beat your record tomorrow, or let's see if you can get a streak of behavioral ratings of, a lot of times they give them colors at school, right? So it's like blue, green, yellow, red, or whatever it is. Let's see if you could beat your record. If you realize that that's one of the reasons why they like the game so much is competing, use that to your advantage. So I think that there is a lot of ways you can customize, that you can engage, that you can learn from, but people will tell me, well, people have said they think he has ADHD, but he'll sit there for 3 hours on this game. It's like, yeah, so use that to your advantage. They're capable of sitting there for 3 hours. So figure out what the game's doing and see if you can create a version of that will engage them. Might not be as exciting, but you know, you can usually pull out some information from it for
No,
sure.
but if your kid likes to be that, the helper person in the video game, find
Sure.
a way to incorporate that in real life. Help me out with
100%.
dinner. Be the person who helps.
Yep. If they have
Good
siblings,
point.
they could be the person that helps the sibling get other stuff done. And then suddenly your
Ooh.
burden is lifted a little bit because now they like the idea that they're like they're your lieutenant and they're helping you out. Sure. Absolutely.
Love that. That's super positive. I think it's a way to really connect parents and kids during this time, where like again,
Hmm.
everybody is kind of like so in their own head about like what's not going right for them.
Yeah.
But that's a way where it could be a positive, like, togetherness, common goal, make it happen, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not as exciting, the way that you're setting things up aren't as exciting, then you just got to be careful of the order you're doing these things, because I found that a lot of families, it's like the kid wakes up and they play some games and then you're trying to yank it out of their hands to try to make them do schoolwork. Even if you gamify the schoolwork and make it a little bit more exciting, it's not going to compare to the games. So, if you flip that order and make it, okay, we're going to try to make the school not as punishing to you. After you get that done, then you can get this really exciting thing that you like. That usually works out much better. That way you're rewarding them for their effort, as opposed to just like trying to rip something fun out of their hands and make them do something less fun.
Yeah, probably not going to get the best response out of that.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
So what do we think about like our adults right now? You guys were mentioning like the average age of like a gamer is like 30. I think we all kind of like grew up a lot with like Nintendo. At least I was more of a Nintendo. Some people are more like PlayStation, but there's definitely kind of like this understanding of like that's part of our lives, and I'll say my boyfriend's out there playing Call of Duty all the time. So I don't know, he likes that. But what do we think about like how that might impact people's mental health in their like adult lives, during this time? Is it making an impact? Is it helpful?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know the answer. I feel like it would wind up being the same kind of idea where it's like, are they still taking care of the things they need to take care of? As an adult, it gets a little bit more complicated because you don't have the parent to stand there and say, hey, you need to get off of this and go do your work. So it relies on a little bit more self-discipline in order to do that.
Yeah.
I would say that the same recommendations that came out in general during the coronavirus that I think most people are aware of, like keep a routine, continue to go to bed at a reasonable hour. And I think it's easy to get lost in sort of a time warp. And especially when you're playing games, one of the things you mentioned about playing for hours on end, they're so engaging that you could easily pour hours into it and kind of just lose track of time. You kind of look around like, did I eat? I don't even know what time it is. Is it morning? What happened? So I think trying to keep a semblance of schedule and routine is helpful for that. A lot of times, a little thing that I do too is right when I log on, I'll tell people about how long I can play, or I'll give them a heads up. Again, if we're playing as teams, so it's like I'm logging on and I go, okay, I think I got like one more round in me, or I'll say that ahead of time so that it's not so, I don't know, it's not so difficult for me to say no. It's already kind of understood. My friends all know my baby's bedtime for that reason I told you earlier, which is
cool. So it's like 7, whatever it is, like 8:30 comes around, like, oh, he's gone.
Yeah, so my buddy texted me 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is usually she's in bed, and then I have time to like finish up on whatever other random errands I need to take care of. So my buddies will text me. They'll say 9 o'clock, And,
I know.
yeah, but I still keep priorities.
Awesome.
The other night they were pushing hard to try to get me to come on, and I said, no, I can't do it. I'm so tired. I need to go to bed. And I'm not kidding you. I got from 3 different types of messages. I got, come on, man, we're waiting for you. And I stuck to my guns. I know. I stuck to my guns, and I said, my heart warms that you want me there and need me there so much, but I got to go to sleep. So I'm trying to do a good job myself of keeping those priorities. But again, it's tougher if your parent's not there to guide you on that. It kind of relies on your own ability to rely on yourself and be tough and disciplined.
Well, I mean, your boss isn't even there, right? So, I mean, you can be home at work, and then you're playing, and then you're like, yeah, sure, whatever. I'm in the Zoom meeting. Like, but you're,
Yeah, doing telehealth, that would be tough. Yeah, because it's like behind them, like behind the screen, I'm playing.
Don't worry about the screen. Nothing's happening there.
Part of me wishes it would be okay with HIPAA if I could play games with the kids, like virtually. I think that would be helpful, as far as like building rapport and, I don't know. I don't think they'll be okay with that, but
probably not. But it
No.
sounds like
Do
a
your
cool
kids
idea.
see you as cool more when like you can connect to them with the game, or are you like still like lame old guy who?
I think I'm like lame old guy who's slightly cooler than most lame old guys, if that
Okay,
makes any sense.
I
Yeah.
love when my patients are like, "Do you know what Snapchat is?"
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
"Do
yeah.
you know that?"
Well,
Like,
I'll
"Do you
start
know what
throwing out the
TikTok
lingo.
is?"
Hmm.
I'm like, "Yes."
you know, I didn't know what TikTok was till very early. I am lame old woman, just letting you know.
I intentionally try to engage in this stuff a lot. So one of the reasons why I continue to engage in them is to just be familiar with what they're doing and how it works. And like Fortnite would be one of the examples where I didn't necessarily want to play that one myself, but I was like, okay, I have to because everybody is talking about it and I need to know what's going on here. So, the Switch and Animal Crossing will be helpful with that too. A lot of people are talking about that. So,
Yeah.
the games are changing all the time. The styles are changing all the time. Each one has its own little nuances. And so the more that I can discuss that, I can't tell you how many times I've mentioned that Fortnite thing about ending on the rounds, and the kids have gone like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much," because the
Oh,
parents
that's
don't
super
understand.
positive.
So
Super
I don't know if it makes
positive.
me cool or not, but it definitely is helpful because they know that I get it. They know I'll start speaking the verbiage, and they go, "Okay, he actually knows what he's talking about," and like
And they feel like
he can help me here.
at the end of the day, any kind of therapy you do, you're in there because you want your feelings validated in some way, right? So
Yeah.
if it's connecting through a game or no matter what it is, even if you saying, yeah, I do know what Snapchat is, it does help.
That's true.
And I think a lot of times the kids are afraid that I'm going to tell the parents to just like throw the game out because the parents, I don't know what they're communicating, but my guess is that they're saying things like, well, we got to go talk to this doctor about how much you're playing this game.
Right.
So the kids probably going in are thinking, I'm going to get this thing taken
And
away from
doctors
me.
are bad. Doctors,
Yeah.
They
give
don't want me
shots, they take
playing.
things away, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I think they're surprised when I tell them that my objective is to get them to play as much as they want, as long as they're taking care of everything else.
So it
Definitely.
teaches responsibility. I mean, that's really what I'm getting from it.
Yeah.
You're kind of, I don't know how to teach a child responsibility exactly, but I feel like if you're teaching them cause and effect, if you don't do your homework, you don't get to play your game, then you're teaching them there are consequences to your actions.
Yeah, and I think
that's the lesson everyone needs.
Yeah, and that question about like, for adults, hopefully you would have some of those principles learned by that point. So you understand I need to take care of this thing before I do that thing. And I need to prioritize this before I prioritize that. I think that's the intent to me overall. I want to teach this not just so they're happy as a kid, but so that they're successful and feeling fulfilled when they're an adult.
Well, this is when you plant the seeds, right? I mean, isn't a lot of like how you're going to be as an adult what happens in like your first few years anyway? So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think people pick up habits, right? You learn the habit of this happens, then that happens, and then this happens, and then that happens. And I remember when I was a kid, my biggest fight was making the bed. I didn't want to make the bed, and it was because I had this like rationale, oh well, I learned at some point it's less hygienic, so well, it's less hygienic, and nobody's gonna see it, and it's pointless. And
I'm gonna
my
get
mom
back in it later and mess it up. So
Yep. And so I put up a fight, and then my mom at some point won that battle, and I just got into the habit of doing that. And then my parents were divorced growing up. So when I was with my dad, at some point he made a comment of, hey, one thing that's awesome? You just get up and you make your bed every day. I don't even have to say anything to you. And I had this moment of like, I didn't have to make it at his house. I just did. Why?
Look at that.
Well, because of the habit, right? Like I built up that muscle memory of I do this, then I do that.
But did it feel good though to hear like you did this right? Like, yeah, I am an adult. Like I feel like responsible.
I think the more that you get rewarded for your behavior, the more likely you are to keep doing that. So yes.
And then that becomes a little more internalized. Like as we kind of get older, we know the value of feeling that like achievement, and then we want to kind of keep going in that direction.
Right. And I think that that's my favorite feeling, is that like fulfillment, like I overcame something difficult. And I think a lot of the games, that's really what they give you too. It's like the games aren't all fun per se. It's not always all fun while you're doing it. You're challenged or you're frustrated about a problem, and you have to overcome it. And when you do that, you feel fulfilled. And I think that that's kind of the point of what I'm hoping to teach families, and I'm hoping to have kids learn, is I can overcome these challenges and I can feel better on the other side. It might not be fun to do it this way. It wasn't as fun for me to go to bed instead of playing with my friends online, but I'm bragging about it now. So obviously I feel pretty good about doing that, right?
Go
so
you.
There's fulfillment on the other side, knowing that you overcame that.
Well, I think it's also goal setting in general. I mean, even, I don't care what you're doing with work, with school. If you're trying to like learn how to drive a car, if we're talking about teenagers, like it's learning those baby steps add up. So you don't just wake up in the morning and become CEO of a company, you know, you kind of have to like work towards it. It's a gradual progression. And I think video games, if they do anything, teach people that goal setting. Even if you're playing Candy Crush, you just can't beat a level. You know, you're just watching your progress of like, oh, I noticed this happens when I do this. You're learning.
Definitely. And I just want to mention a quick comment we got from Scott. He says, I hate when parents say I can't take away their laptop because they have to do their homework on it.
Yeah, so usually you can use the technology to your advantage. You just have to take the time to look it up. For example, if you have Xfinity, you have XFi, and if you log into your account, you can set certain devices to certain people, and you can have them customized to disconnect from your Wi-Fi at certain times of the day. You can open up your phone and you can hit pause device, and it could just disconnect only their device, not your entire Wi-Fi.
Wait, it can do that? I did not. I live alone.
And you can group them under different profiles. So you could have Jimmy's phone and Jimmy's laptop and Jimmy's everything that's connected to the Wi-Fi.
I can turn off your iPad at like 9:30 because it's bedtime. I can turn it off. You're no longer on your phone or whatever.
Yeah. Not only that, you could have it automatically turn off at that time. You don't have to do anything. You just set, and only certain days of the week you can go in and program it. With laptops, a lot of times you have to go into the settings. Sometimes you might need to create like a sub account. So if you worked for somebody else, you might have something like that where there's like an administrator, but then you have a profile under that. So you might need to make a profile for the kid. And under the profile, you can usually go into settings and limit the programs that they're able to use. Now, kids are smart and they outsmart the adults all the time. I remember when I was a kid and they first tried to put restrictions on what websites we could go on the computers at school. Kids very quickly figured out that you could go into like a translator. You could go into like Google Translate and just put the website in there. And Google was whitelisted. Google was okay to go on. So technically it was google.translate, whatever. So then we figured out how to go around it. So nothing beats monitoring. Nothing beats being engaged with it and checking on them. And
nothing beats a kid with a goal.
That's so true. And honestly, like going back to like where we all began with our talk, the amount of creativity, the amount of problem solving skills, the amount of just like, just ability that gamers have, honestly, like it's impressive. Like, I think it is really cool. And I think that in many ways, like being able to have games during this current pandemic can still fuel a lot of those things for people. And so I'm glad that we kind of are noticing some of the positivity that is coming out of these things.
I agree. And, if we didn't have them, I think there would be a lot more trouble. You would have kids getting into more trouble, and kind of like you mentioned, kids, if they want something, they find a way to get it. So true. I would rather, if it was me, when my little one gets older, I would rather have her, trying to sneak onto her electronic to get an in-game item than to try to sneak out of my house to go to some other place. So if we can get them
pandemic, we're all supposed to stay inside, right? So
exactly,
if you're Fortnite, it's a lot easier to play in your room than it is outside.
So if we can teach them healthy ways to manage that and healthy ways to balance their life out and make sure that they're doing all the other things we want them to be doing, exercising, eating right, all of those good things, I think that the benefits can kind of dovetail with those, and you turn out with somebody who's got their priorities straight and can have fun and can reap the benefits without as many of the consequences.
So I think as we're coming to an end of our episode today, I think we have some really good take-home messages here. I think it all has to be around being aware and careful and paying attention to your priorities and having communication. If you're a parent, having a communication with your child about things, setting an exchange of what expectations are, what goals are supposed to look like. And I think it's wonderful to know that this is actually a good avenue for kids to learn a lot of skill, I don't know if you guys want to add any more take-home messages.
So don't take away the game, just like monitor it and make sure that you're doing it right. I mean, like saying you can't play Fortnite ever or whatever game it is, it's probably not going to work.
It's unrealistic.
That's a tool.
Yeah.
To help.
Yeah, in my experience, what the kids wind up doing is trying to find reasons to go to their friend's house so they can play, or sneak out and find their brothers or whatever. And in reality, again, we want them to have the skill when they're older. Most likely, these kids playing now will continue to play when they're adults too. And I would rather have my kid make some mistakes and learn from them and learn how to manage it than to do like an abstinence style where they never really learn it. And then one day they buy a game system and then it just overtakes their life because they haven't learned those skills.
Good point. So again, like that conversation, so valuable, the learning the skills early, making mistakes
and engaging
early.
with it, really getting in touch with it. I know it might not be parents' favorite thing to do, but it's rewarding for the kid to show you what they're into. It's helpful so you understand it better. You'll be able to set up the expectations in a way that the kid will be more likely to adhere to. So I think if nothing else, that's my biggest recommendation. It's like engage with it and then develop some predictable ways to balance and set priorities.
Well, I'm thinking of it like just the same way that a child would engage with you a little bit more as a therapist. He gets gaming, like he understands where I'm coming from. I think if the parents understand it, your kid may be more open to talk to you about other things beyond gaming. I'm comfortable with you. You understand my love of Fortnite a little bit. You kind of get me. Now I can tell you about that thing that happened at school. Now I feel like we're a little bit more connected in that. Are you seeing at least that perception?
Yeah, I think there needs to be some. Yeah, there needs to be some level of like being non-judgmental when they're sharing it with you too. So in other words, if they show you it and you go, well, this is pointless. Why would you spend your time doing this stupid thing? And who cares about this item in the game? They're going to feel invalidated and they're going to be less likely to share those things with you. So, and I don't think it's fake either. I feel like you just need to, imagine if a kid drew you a picture and handed it to you. Would you look at it and be like, well, this is crap. Like, it's pointless. Why did you do this?
This isn't refrigerator worthy. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's something that they put hours into. It's something that they put work in, that they're passionate about. And if nothing else, you can acknowledge the fact that they're excited about something, dedicated to something. Now, does that mean that you don't put limits on it? No, you can definitely put limits on it, and you can explain to them why, or, you can have discussions about it of like, well, what kind of impact do you think it has to play this type of game, or how much do you think is too much? Even having the kid give you their input, even if you don't listen to it, a lot of times that can really make them feel like they were a part of the process instead of it being inflicted on them. And usually they're much more likely to go with it if they feel like you understood them at least first.
Awesome. A really good avenue for building a lot of that connection, All right, guys. So I think we have to wrap up at this time. Dr. Arcidiacono, thank you so much for taking your time and sharing with us. I learned a ton, just putting that out there. This is such a good topic for us to discuss. And I hope that a lot of parents are going to be able to watch our episode, because I think it gives a good perspective on many things that maybe like we don't necessarily like think about, and as we're stepping into like the kids' world a little bit more and seeing where they're at right now.
And the trend is continuing up. So this will be probably a more and more common conversation people will be having. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I like talking about this stuff, obviously, so I don't mind at all. It was a great time.
Thank you. And is there like a email that, or maybe like a website that people can reach you at if they're wanting to like learn more about you or contact you?
Sure. Yeah. Probably the best way to get a hold of me is email. And my email is drsteve@boystown.org. It's dr. You need the dot. STEVE @boystown.org. You don't need my last name, which is good because it's so long and hard to pronounce. So
cool. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. This video will stay up on the event page. So feel free, for you guys who are watching, feel free to share, tell your friends. And Paradise and I will be back next week at 5:30 for another episode of Corner Hour. Next week, we will be talking about mindful eating through the pandemic. So we'll have Carolina Gaviria, licensed mental health counselor, and Yaneth Beltran, registered dietitian, who specialize both in eating disorders. They will come on and talk to us a little bit about all the nutrition factors in eating of, dealing with what we're going through right now.
eating and gaming, you know, those kind of go together too.
I like it.
Like I said, priorities. You gotta have your priorities straight.
Awesome. And you know what? Bring your snacks next time. Bring your snacks to our hour. We'll hang out and like maybe have some snacks. All right,
Awesome.
guys. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
watching. See you guys next week. Thank you again, Dr. Arcidiacono.
Thanks
Good
for
to have
having me.
you. Bye, everybody.